Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this Enrichment Week Christmas Lecture Series talk. I'm Luke Thompson, a business analyst at Dunelm, but also alumni of the University of Lincoln, Computer Information Systems. Chris Hedleyand has joined me today to help facilitate, and I'll over to Chris to introduce.
Hi, well, hopefully people know who I am, but if not, I'm Chris Hedleyand. I'm the Director of Teaching and Learning in the School of Computer Science, and I'm an Associate Professor at the University of Lincoln. And Luke, it's absolutely fantastic to have you back. It's the prodigal son has returned.
It's a pleasure to be back, and Chris, it's a long time since I've had the chance to speak to people. It's a bit weird now, and I think it'd be daft for me not to mention this. I'm standing in a home office rather than the Isaac Newton building. I don't have a stream of parents in front of me or my College of Science helper t-shirt on, so it's a bit of a strange one. But hopefully you'll find this interesting today. I've put this together to try and show some interesting tidbits that I've come across from being in retail for the past couple of years. And I kind of wanted this to try and spark and inspire a few people, and that's big claims, but I wanted to show folks that there is more to show you. So that's a little bit about me, and if everyone's happy, we'll get cracking. One thing to note, we are live, so there's a chat box available, and Chris is monitoring that. So if anybody has any questions throughout the show, please feel free to drop them into the chat box. Chris will raise a few up, and also call me out and if there's any points that need to be explained. And then hopefully you'll have an enjoyable session. So the computing that powers retail. The talk came from a conversation myself and Chris actually of I really wanted to come back and do a talk as part of this series, but I wasn't really sure what I could offer. And we started to talk about what I've been up to, what things I've been doing in my work life, as well as things after university. And we kind of decided that graduate recruitment wasn't really the exciting topic it could be. So if anybody's got any questions on that, that's for a separate talk entirely. But I thought I'd get into retail and say, well, I kind of know what you're thinking. The retail downturn has been kind of ongoing since the start of 2019, not helped by COVID-19. But the British Retail Consortium said that total sales fell 0.1%, which is the first sales decline since 95. For info, that was when I was born. But it does show that, retail might not be the exciting sector that you might think that you would want to get into, and certainly where you wouldn't find technology. You might be right in certain areas, but I thought I'd try and kind of demystify and debunk a few of those myths and show you what retail looks like. So in the past, retail was all about entrepreneurs. It was about market stall to stores all around the country. I work for Dunelm, so we started on a market stall with a husband and wife team, and then progressed up to where we are now with 173 shops. But that all started around being an entrepreneur and starting off really small and building up. Very similar to Jeff Bezos in his garage, starting Amazon. Again, starting really small and then growing to something huge. In retail, we've seen the department stores rise, so Marks and Spencer's, Debenhams, and I know there's ongoing things with those, but specialist retailers who were really good at what they did and people really wanted to go shopping. Things like social shopping became really important. We've now got huge companies that are built around putting retail stores in large locations for people to visit. So I'm not going to geographically shame anybody, but from those in London, there's around Watford. There's also some like the Into brand, which has got Derby, Sheffield and other areas. So there's all these places where retailers have gone, right, we want to buy and we want to sell product to customers. The dot-com boom comes along and shifts.
So I was about to say, it's really interesting you say about the social shopping now. I mean, how many shops now have like cafeterias and stuff in them? It's,
that's a really great point. Yeah, it's a really great point because what we see now is that the destination of a shop is not just to go to a shop and come away with something. Even on retail parks, which is where you find Dunelm and other stores, is that you've got stores that are bringing shop within a shop concepts, getting people to stay on site longer. And the coffee shop chains have definitely benefited from that. You'll see Starbucks and Pret and others who are on retail parks allowing people to stay and dwell longer. If I'm one of those people who, if I drive to a shopping centre, I'll happily park my car and then go for a bite to eat, or it might even be where I go and find leisure activity in cinemas and things like that. So it's definitely a change that the high street started to wiggle and outgrow itself, and then move on to these retail parks, as well as, the high street still remains in some areas. So back onto my point around the dot-com boom, it kind of came with some real positives and real negatives. And I put there about the demise of specialist retailers. So price comparison, consumers had more data available to them to start to go to retailers that they would never have considered because of geographical restrictions, or retailers that are just offering a better price or a better product. And even then, we start to see the shift then into subscription models. So you can buy a car on a subscription service, which blew my mind the other day. But also we look at media. We've got Netflix, we've got food, we've got HelloFresh. We've got all these outlets that are starting to challenge traditional retail. So what I really wanted to get to was what retail is not. And these two guys here, I've done it for comedy value, but these two guys holding their till like it's the best thing that's happened to them. It's really not just about tills and selling stuff. I was really, really shocked when I first started in retail that I thought I was going to be doing some really cool stuff and constantly working on tills. The truth of the matter is I've not actually touched a till for a while. And that's something that, we can talk at length about through this deck. So technology in retail has kind of been around a while. And for those of you who were unsure, I thought I'd kind of talk a little bit about what technology in retail might look like and start to point it out to you. We started to see barcodes on chewing gum in 1974. So the humble barcode, as old school as it is still used throughout retail today. In other countries, so in France, it's actually a legal requirement that we show shelf edge labels with barcodes and other information to make sure prices are correct. And there are other regulations in the UK as well that we have to follow. We've also been securing goods with technology to prevent theft. And those security gates, I'm sure we've all walked through and set them off a few times, but not necessarily spared a thought at, how or why that happened. But before big data was cool, Tesco were understanding shoppers' habits when it introduced the club card in 95. And that year, customers were spending about 28% more in its stores and 16% less with its closest rival, Sainsbury's. That stat particularly worried me because at that time, we weren't in a world of big data. And I remember on my final year of university talking about big data like it was this far future thing that we hadn't quite come to yet, when actually customer data becomes so much more important. And if you're interested in data, do not write retail off, because there is so much available that we are actively trying to use. Amazon are great examples. Tesco still modify their club card platform yearly. And then we've got other ways in which customer data is really important. But then you might think, okay, well, I'm not really interested in that. What else is there in retail? And retail is just like any other business. We have networking requirements. We have storage and compute requirements. We have ERPs, that's entity resource planning, and finance, business information, reporting, office desktop computing. And then we also have the tills. So under that banner of retail, we have all this stuff that you kind of might say, well, okay, Luke, that's not really that exciting. So what drives us to make changes and what keeps us busy? And this is where the market starts to change. And we start to see where the market starts to push us in ways that we never thought really possible. And there's loads of market changes. I'm not going to cover them all on this deck. And if anyone's got any specific questions, please feel free to fire them over and we'll bring them up in the chat channel shortly. But some things that I thought I'd pick out and highlight were customers' expectations. So we've seen a massive shift in customer expectations over the past couple of years. Argos have released Fast Track, which means that you can now get home delivery of items within about an hour to 2 hours of ordering them online. We've got Amazon, who are behemoths in the idea of customer fulfillment, and they are bringing in more and more ways to service customers through their Amazon Prime brand. But then also customers' expectations lie in around returns as well. So retail is not just about sale. We have to accept that sometimes customers don't want items that they've purchased, or they might want to return for some reason. And handling those returns and expectations of how customers work really drives retailers and technologists like myself to change. Other external factors that come in. So things like COVID-19, and I've used the picture, but external factors that force us to change. The retail market was impacted by the General Data Protection Regulation. It's been impacted by COVID-19. Retailers are constantly having to adapt and react, be that in their store networks, if they're an online retailer, even small retailers. I was shocked the other month when I realised that now a food festival that I regularly go to, that has obviously been cancelled due to recent events, was now starting to start back up, but with fully contactless payments. That was something that I completely hadn't thought of, but small food trucks are in a position where they have dashboarding, payments using contactless and Android and Apple Pay, and they're able to take and bring customers in without just cash. And we'll come on to that in a second. Another thing that appears is sustainability, and not just sustainability in being green and being focused on doing things in a sustainable manner, because the planet is great and we all want to keep that, but a sustainability from a business perspective as well. We are not in retail to make a loss. Retailers want to make money and they want to sell product. That's what they're here for. But it's about servicing customers and making sure that customers want to come back to you. Chris made a great point at the top of the call there. There's no secret that Dunelm and other retailers have other reasons to go to shops. Tesco have recently announced a partnership with AO.com as a shop within a shop concept. So you can be picking up your weekly shop, but also shopping for a new dishwasher. And that change in the market is driving and allowing retailers to be visible in places that they weren't before. Another thing that really matters is customers' opinions. It can kill retailers if customers' opinions aren't taken into account or just aren't dealt with in a sensible way. So you'll notice that customers' opinions are now being brought in. I get bombarded with surveys afterwards, but retailers really want to know about customers and what they think of their service and if they're going to come back again. And those opinions, if they're good, bad, indifferent, get shown on websites and they drive purchases. They're not always good. We see what happens with Amazon, where we have the review scandals and things that have been on Dispatches and other TV shows. But actually, companies want to show off that, this is what a piece of furniture looks like in a customer's home. This is what I thought of a water bottle that I recently purchased. And it helps buyers and purchasers make decisions. Probably that a bit that I think this audience will be the most excited about is technology changes. And I was one of those people who said there's not a lot of technology in retail. And I've been so far proven wrong. And trying to research this deck and put together something that I thought would be interesting to fellow folks who have graduated, undergraduate students, and even those who are in post-16 education thinking, where's my career going right now? There is a hell of a lot of technology change that forces us to move in retail. One of those that you can't avoid is payment. I get really excited about payment because we're now in a position where our website is looking into taking Klarna, PayPal. We're taking Android, Google Pay payments in some retailers. We're pulling in contactless payments in store, and cash is no longer king. And I brought up that retail question earlier and so, what it's not. And cash was that big focus of the market stall and the start of those retailers. And now actually it's not just about having cash, it's about having multiple opportunities to allow customers to purchase your products or services. Warehousing and supply chain, probably the least sexy part about retail. And I'm cautious of using that terminology, but realistically, it's where I do most of my work as a business analyst. And we're looking at processes of how we purchase, move, and deliver stock from the Far East, from Europe, from even UK suppliers, and get that to our stores, to our customers in the quickest, most efficient way possible. And that's really dialing it down. But if you think about the complexity of getting a bottle of water, just like this, onto a shipping container with thousands, millions of other bottles of water, putting that onto a ship with thousands of containers on it, moving it from the Far East to a port, and then tipping that trailer into a warehouse ready for dispatch. There are so many different touch points and processes that are really, really exciting. And this particular picture shows where automation starts to come in. So we've got here an automated gantry crane working at a port, dropping onto an automated low loader. And again, this is kind of the cutting edge. Retail is probably not right there, but it's all part of that supply chain. And you start to see where we can start to add in. And as technologists, we can really start to come into our own, be that with mathematics, be that with complicated ideas or solutions, or, how do we get the most onto a container and make that journey the most efficient it can be. One that you might have seen a lot about, and I'm really annoyed that I don't have the photograph anymore, but a photograph of myself at an Amazon fulfillment center. Robotics and automation, there are two experts in it in the UK, in my view, and that's Ocado and Amazon. They've spent a lot of time in looking at how to make warehousing efficient and automating those repetitive tasks, especially in the fresh food industry where Ocado operate. The difference between a 24-hour shift and running 12 hours a day, or colleagues getting tired, is huge. It means that we can actually pick, pack and dispatch orders on a far greater volume than if we could doing it manually. And then another thing with this particular example is that the robots themselves are running in a warehouse that isn't actually accessible by humans. So they are driving over the top of a warehouse and turning a warehouse into almost a 3D space. That is unheard of. And if you start to look at warehouse design, they've normally got aisles for a forklift with a driver, or they've got aisles for a human to walk down to pick product. Actually, we've got rid of both of those and said, right, we'll use automated robots to do that, and adaptive 4G connectivity to get those robots to do a disco dance around that floor in the most efficient way we can. Another one that shocked me, actually, but I realized that we've had for a while, is the Internet of Things. And again, it gets branded a lot, and we've talked about it, but the Internet of Things actually comes in, and I've used the consumer kit as a picture here. The consumer kit is actually quite close to what we see. So be that in security, be that in CCTV systems, be that in heating and solar power. All of those technologies actually play a part in how retailers operate, because they're not just operating a store and focusing on the selling of goods, because there's more to it than that. If you operate a store network, you've got so much more that you could be up to. So actually, a retail store is not far off your home with a Hive or a Nest connected setup. Some retailers are even looking at computer vision to start looking at saying, okay, so I know that from a CCTV perspective, 10 people have walked into my store. Okay, how long did those 10 people stay in the store? Where did they go? How long did they dwell? And we're starting to see that research come into the university space, which is amazing, because it means that we start to accelerate that learning. But also it comes and gets put in the hands of retailers so that they can start to make better displays. They can merchandise their product better. They know where to put the most product, where most people go in stores. And also where we can save money on efficiency. So where we can turn the lights off in stores, or where we can turn heating down, for example. But footfall is definitely king. And that is something that retailers really watch. So if you're running a website, you'll be watching how many people come to your website. When you're running stores, you're watching how many people come physically into your stores, as well as how many people hit your website. It's a combined approach. Another couple of things that have happened is around in-store communications. So voice over IP technology has been given to retailers. And, this isn't Skype and Teams calls like we're doing. This is actually much more about actually getting the right colleagues to the right place. Be that a quiet conversation with a manager to ask for some more support on tills. It might be actually that a customer needs some support carrying something heavy out of a store. We've got other retailers like Halfords who are using it to put technicians who fit modifications to vehicles and put those in the right place at the right time, as well as even in fast food outlets. So communication is really key to allowing stores to be functional. And that's a key part that technology plays in not just the upkeep of those systems, but developing them. I mentioned earlier that about... Go on, Chris.
There's a really interesting question in the chat from Debbie Wood. How concerning is the possible disruption that a no-deal Brexit might cause to a supply chain? I'm sure this is not just Dunelm, right? I'm sure.
No, Exactly that, and it's a really good question. And thank you for putting that one through. The supply chain at the moment, everyone's very nervous, and I think everybody, like with COVID, is waiting to hear from the government and what the new rules are and what things are going to be like. Ultimately, supply chains are worried. They have been. They were worried about COVID. They were worried about a No Deal Brexit. Ultimately, the way that supply chains will look at this is around their suppliers and how their suppliers can produce stock and move it to the UK, whether that's using different suppliers, moving that manufacturing operation or moving that supplier to the UK, or it might be that we start to look at how we bring those goods in. And so from a technology focus and selfishly, that's what paperwork do we need? What customs declarations do we need? What preparations can we make for a no deal Brexit situation to cope with that change? And that's definitely one of those external factors I talked about, that the retailers at the moment are just planning, and they are planning for every eventual opportunity. Retailers with large warehouses and large stockpiles are going to be relatively okay because they won't be hit as hard. Some retailers are what we call just in time. So they will be moving goods at a much quicker rate. So a customer might place an order today and the retailer might purchase that onwards straight away. So that might impact and slow down goods at ports. We're already seeing ports are slightly slower. And as I mentioned about shipping containers, if you've got ports that are more full, it's harder to unload ships quicker, and the ships need to move on. They've got a planned schedule of destinations, and we don't want to cause blockades. So I think in answer to the question, it's a lot of planning. But yeah, trying to second guess how the government's going to react and what the trade negotiations look like is going to be really important. We have had some information released to us about Northern Ireland, which will really help. We do have stores in Northern Ireland and other retailers do as well. So that will really help with that particular part of the border. But I know that there are retailers who do have stores in both the United Kingdom and Ireland who will be more concerned about that trade relationship across the Northern Irish border. I hope that's answered the question.
That's really interesting.
Cheers. Thanks, Chris. So that's comms and a bit about supply chain. And then we move on to selling solutions. So I would challenge you to have not seen a selling solution in stores. We've less so, I suppose, in the recent times, but we've seen retailers using self-service, colleague-assisted sales, and technology is just, we're arming our store colleagues with technology. These first three pictures are all technologies that we basically give to store colleagues. And they look a little bit like Robocop, was something that our old CIO said. But actually arming them with all this technology means that they've got information to service customers. And back when I joined university, it was all about business information systems. And that was the thing in my head that I really wanted to look into and look about how that helps. And in retail, it's just that. It's about timely information, correct information, and then being able to update that information. And if you are in that space, I personally find it really interesting. It can be really fulfilling to see that being used on the ground. So stock solutions is probably one of the biggest areas at the moment that retailers are looking at, because we have problems in retail. So there are problems like theft, loss, damage, but also then things go missing in the supply chain. So from that question there around what happens in supply chain, if we see a delay in certain products, or we see items or containers go missing, that can start to cause problems. So we're trying to get better with stock solutions. So some retailers are now actually trialing using RFID and NFC technology to be able to scan a whole rail of clothing and understand what's there, what size is it, where does it live, where do I need to put it? And then things like click and collect is driven by handheld technologies that are mobile applications. So for the app developers out there, they're running off back-end systems. For those back-end sysadmins out there, there's so many things that these pieces of technology drive, but you only realize it when you scratch the surface. Probably one of the last ones I'm going to talk about on this small scale, and one that, Chris, I'd be interested in your opinions on, is the shift to augmented reality and virtual reality. I've exampled IKEA here, but at the time when I was at university, this was something I thought wouldn't catch on. But we've seen the gaming industry kind of take it on wholeheartedly and now appear in IKEA world. I just wondered what your thoughts were, Chris.
Yeah, so I mean, AR is it's becoming so accessible, right? I mean, we only have to go back a few years where the standard computer that we all have in our pockets, the old mobile phone, wasn't really powerful enough to do anything particularly interesting on the AR side. Now, a lot of people, most people have a device that will do that really well. And we are starting to see more and more of that. I mean, and like I say, in the background, it's a lot of technologies that have come from gaming that have enabled that. But I mean, this is the example you've got up for me is a classic example of why AR works. I mean, I come from a design background. Visualizing a space, visualizing a color palette, for me is commonplace. For my partner, it isn't. So actually, walking around a store when we were looking for a sofa was a real challenge because, well, will this look good in the space? And you've no idea. But actually, to be able to say, well, let's get out the augmented reality. Let's hold up our phone and see what this looks like. It can make those decisions a lot easier. And I imagine, for a retail side, that will result in a lot less returns.
In theory, yes, and this is something we haven't seen played around with too much. The IKEA app has been downloaded a few times, but there's still a few barriers to entry, and some retailers are finding that they're producing these technology advancements, but they're not really getting the buy-in because customers still have to download an app, or there's things like that going on. We have seen a few retailers really take advantage of visual search. So Google Lens and other products across the search vendors, allowing them to search their product catalog. So I can walk into one of our stores and take a photo of something and find an equivalent product elsewhere. I can also do the reverse. I can start to find similar products. So I'm opening and expanding my purchasing choices, but retailers are benefiting from that technology. But you are exactly right.
In that, though? Because I mean, this is just from the way I still remember the challenge a lot of bookstores had, in the early kind of days of Amazon, where people would go into the bookstore to do their browsing, and then would go online to Amazon to then buy the product because there was a saving of 60 pence or whatever it was.
Yeah.
And
this is a problem.
Visual search,
Yeah, this is definitely a problem, Chris. And sorry for cutting you off there. It's a problem that we see. It's called showrooming, and people will happily use stores as an option to go and do that. I'm not fully au fait with all of the retailers that do this, but price comparison is something that we've had in retail for a while and will always continue. It's probably more about the services that those individual retailers offer, and it's not necessarily just about price anymore. What we start to see with the IKEA view of the world is that it's about a shopping experience. You've probably driven an hour or so to get to those venues. So you're probably going to want to come away with something. Otherwise, it's going to be an expensive delivery, or you're going to have to do something quite different. We see that in our stores. We see some folks who are just walking around having a browse, and then they purchase online. Part of the bit that I want to get to a bit later on data is we do know customers do that. But actually, it's about something that is called multi-channel retail moving to omni-channel. So multi-channel is where you have what I would call silos. So you have a setup of, I've got my online website, I've got my stores, and then I've got some weird setup that I'm trialing something really new on a market stall. So those three channels never meet each other. So you've got customers who might independently shop each one, and that's fine. And a lot of retailers are in multi-channel mode. We see that all the time. The harder shift is to get to omni-channel. So where actually, as a retailer, you can step back and say, I don't care whether my customer goes into someone else's store, my store, and browses for product, because they can interact with my website and then collect in my store. And bringing that true omni-channel approach starts to then make it a lot more competitive in the market, because retailers are not just delivering then products and being effectively warehouses, they're actually delivering services and reasons for customers to come shopping with yourself, which might then negate that 60p price difference.
Oh, makes a lot of sense.
So, yeah, and I think it's a great point to raise, Chris, and something that definitely with the retail of the future, and whenever we talk about store of the future, there's always a tablet or an iPad in hand with something new on it. And that's where definitely people are starting to look. It wouldn't be a presentation on computing without talking about own data center and cloud. It's something that I was learning in the last year of my degree, and it was more about the Azure basics and understanding different types of cloud computing. So what is cloud? Effectively, you're taking your own computing power, your own networking, and your own software potentially, and putting that into someone else's data center on the very, very high level. Digging down, I started off learning Azure basics, and I'm now working for the biggest AWS serverless customer. So what does that look like? We've got companies like Amazon Web Services, Microsoft, and Google, who are all in the Magic Quadrant for 2019, offering you the ability to have space in their data center. So we changed the way that technology is evolving now by having this as a capability. For an example, so if you wanted to make a website for your family cupcake shop, you might go to a hosting provider, they'll sell you space on a server, you need to decide how big your website's going to be, how many customers you're going to get, and all of these upfront decisions that start to make not a lot of sense. And that's the same for infrastructure as a service, where you're just moving a big server that you physically got in your hands into the cloud and virtualizing and using loads of cool technology in there. Back-end devs, you're going to hate me for this because I'm simplifying, but hopefully that explains it. What cloud computing now allows us to do is to start to shift that load to the cloud and say, well, actually, let's just think of it as a pay-as-you-go mobile. We'll just pay for what you use. That's eureka. So little cupcake business can go from 0 to 100 miles an hour very quickly based on traffic that hits their website. So if they get a day one swamp of customers, they're fine. Their website's okay. They're online. Their uptime metrics are good and everyone's happy. And we see that with developers as well. So we've got everything from the infrastructure level. So can I host my server or service in your cloud, please? And there's providers that will help with that. We see platform as a service, which is where we see developers being able to write code and then host it in the cloud without having to think about the infrastructure side of things. So this is where the word serverless comes from. And we start to think, well, okay, if I'm a developer, I can write a piece of Python code and see it run in the cloud. I don't need to think about the server, the operating system, the network. All I need to think about is the API gateway and the particular function that's going to run. So I will use AWS Lambda as an example. That means that developers can build things faster with varying levels of control. They also don't have to have conversations with networks teams, infrastructure teams to start to say, well, how big is this service? What do I need to do? Scoping things start to change. Actually, I just want to trial this. So if you think back to the days of market stalls, it's can I have a market stall and see how it goes? And it's that level of thinking. But as a business analyst, this benefits me heavily because I'm already using services like Office 365, Google Drive, Lucid Charts to do my job, which are all licensed pieces of software that operate in the cloud. But also then we're seeing developers that I can have conversations with in my role to say, hey, this process that we've got that's not quite working in supply chain, can we modify it? Well, our speed and pace of delivery is increased tenfold because we don't have to think about some of those, what we would call non-functional requirements as heavily as we would do in the past.
Luke, there's a question in the chat, which I think your role as a business analyst, this comes into quite heavily, actually. Also have to overcome the suspicion from the customers thinking extra information is being utilized by the retailer on this kind of data area. And I mean, I'm the first, as soon as somebody asks me, you know, can I have your name and postcode for the warranty? What are you using this for?
Yeah, definitely. And those are valid questions. And I think, Debbie, that's a really great question to ask because customers are suspicious. They want to know what you're doing. And there have been car crash stories in the past of where retailers have gone probably and stepped the line. Ultimately, what retailers want to do is make their services better and learn, and also do that in hopefully in an ethical and sensible way, which I think is the shift that we've started to see. We are governed by the General Data Protection Regulation. So if we take your address and postcode for an order, we can only use it for that order. But because some retailers will ask you to opt into their marketing communications because you might be interested. They might see your email address multiple times across their website. They might see a tracking cookie and use that as an ability to market better towards your preferences. So the way I would look at it, and I'm quite pro to allowing my data to be sensitively dealt with, is that it helps me have a better experience. Therefore, I'm okay with it. But also choosing the retailers you shop with who have, you know, a good moral code and ethics to not track and sell your data like we've seen in some of those horror stories, I think. But definitely, you know, data is all around us and it's definitely being used. And when I get to the case study, I'll kind of talk to some of that. But it's amazing the amount of data that we generate as retailers. And actually the customer's personal data is possibly less interesting to retailers, in my view. I think it's actually more the transaction histories and what orders that you've placed in the past and what things that you might be interested in that, marketeers who might be joining this call would be really, really keen to know about. Some of our customer relationship programs are based on abandoned baskets. I would challenge you to not have had an abandoned basket email recently, because that's retailers saying, hey, you forgot this. Are you sure you don't want to? And it recognizes those changes in people's behavior where they're saying, well, I'm going to hold it in my basket and wait for a coupon. That's a known thing that we see in consumer groups like that you find on Martin Lewis Money Show and others that recommend people put stuff in their basket and hold on. Because some retailers will say, oh, we've got a customer that hasn't converted. Let's help them along the way. And definitely it converts. It works on me all the time. It works on my partner. So, there are places that Debbie is correct that, retailers are actively showing that. But I think as technologists, we can be really conscious of when that's happening and also conscious of what we agree to in terms and conditions. We've done a real load of work to make sure that it's very clear what customers are opting into under GDPR. And a lot of retailers have done exactly the same, because it's our responsibility to show customers that, this is what we're going to do with your data when we've received it. So I am going to talk a bit about Dunelm, but I've said to Chris, this isn't about recruitment. This is about what we can do with technology and why I'm really glad I joined Dunelm from a technology perspective to get involved. So we started our serverless journey 2 years ago, and we're now the biggest serverless customer in the EAME region. But we've been able to use that technology to gain 150% capacity uplift at peak periods. So to flash you back a couple of months back, actually it's a couple of years now since the transition fully happened, we were running application servers in a rented data center that once load became too much, we would start to slow customers down and put them behind a queue. You see retailers do it all the time. They will queue customers up because they can't service demand. And retail is spiky. We see high peaks of demand and then absolutely nothing. We've got sale periods that come and go, and that exact behavior happens. So we've been able to take advantage of things like edge computing through a company called Fastly. And Fastly has enabled us to increase our homepage speed by 900%. I don't know whether that's a bad thing on our old website, Chris, or more of a good thing on the new one. But it just shows how technology has evolved and we've been able to enhance that and use it, and how developers are excited to work on new platforms. Again, retailers are looking for how to change their technology and use new technologies, which is a great time to be a developer who's starting their career, or somebody who is currently in a line of work, like myself, who was a business analyst at Caterpillar on my industrial placement, working on very old traditional technologies like ERPs, databases, and then moving swiftly into this serverless and flashy new world. It's quite something.
It's really interesting, isn't it? Because I have been known to, if I'm on a web store and there's any kind of delay, if the site's moving slowly, I lose trust in that site. I think, okay, why is this not going quickly? Is there something? What's the back end look like? And I think, ugh. And in the time I take that decision, I've already gone somewhere else and bought my product from a competitor. But I mean, I do wonder how much of that is impatience, right? I mean, I'm not that old, but I'm old enough to remember the internet of yore, right? Where I can remember sitting at my computer, getting home from high school, putting on my computer and think, oh, I want to listen to a song. And I would set that song downloading, go off, make myself some food, make a cup of tea, do whatever chores I do. 20 minutes, come back, and it's just about downloaded. 20 odd minutes just to download one piece of music. And that seemed fine. That seemed convenient at the time. I can do this from home. It's fantastic. If I had to wait more than 3 or 4 seconds for YouTube to load, I would assume YouTube was broken.
Yeah, exactly. And this is something that, we see in conversion metrics. So we see customers that get to basket, and if we see the slightest delay, that's it, they're out of here. And you're right, because they've got choice. Netflix are a big serverless customer. The reason they're very good at what they do is because they make the content that people want to watch available when people want to watch it. Bingo. And this is something that we saw with, we're trying to surface really high quality imagery. Yeah, exactly. And when we're trying to surface this high quality content really quickly, we're then at the mercy of the broadband providers, the 5G, the 4G connection. But also, if we can do our bit to say, right, instead of this one single server over here, let's have it blasted around the UK, and other availability zones, ready for customers to use it when they want to. And that's something that, the Netflix bingers have happily enjoyed through lockdown. But, it's not foolproof. We saw that, there are times when Netflix got put under load. We went to standard streaming for a certain portion of the lockdown period. So definitely it is something that's very interesting. So another stat for you, because I'm throwing stats at this case study, but just to kind of show the breadth of what we have. And we did also see a 472% increase on average across the remaining pages. So, the home page is one thing, and you're right, Chris, home page load time is really important for customers. They want to get there really quickly, but customers hit web pages from all sorts of angles. So there might be some marketing folks on who are interested in search engine optimization or in paid marketing. And those routes through need to be just as snappy, because if a customer's clicked on a paid for link, you've paid for them to get there. Like, you've paid their entry fee to the website. Now you better sell something to them quickly. Otherwise you're just giving away some money. Customer experience is part of that. And, one of the things that we noted was around some of the more physical things that take part in retail, and especially online retail. And again, I said Amazon were kings in terms of Prime and getting stuff from A to B as fast as possible in a very seamless manner. And what the Dunelm case study shows us is that we were trying to provide an accurate delivery promise to customers, where in the past we just couldn't do it. We were saying click and collect in some time, and we were saying that this will be delivered to you in 3 to 5 weeks. Well, that doesn't give you an opportunity, especially in a world like today, to make sure that you're in, to make sure that the carrier is not going to fail that delivery. If you've spent a considerable amount of money on, something really important to you, you might have bought something from an electronics retailer. So you've bought your brand new TV that you cannot wait to watch Netflix on. But then actually you don't know when it's going to come. So that movie night that you were going to organise post-COVID isn't going to happen. And what we've started to look at here is how to give tools back to what I would call the business. So there's this view in technology where you're working in tech, you don't necessarily work in the business. And that's something that's very different to a pure tech company. So if you go and work for an Amazon or Google, you're working with technology all the time. But we talk about business stakeholders, which is where myself as a business analyst we come into our own. And that actually we've given back a lot of control. So if somebody in our warehouse team says, look, we need to turn Express down, it's going a bit mental, we can turn Express off. If we need to decrease lead times, because you know what, we've got some space in the warehouse, we've got some colleagues that want to be picking some goods, great, let's speed the lead times up. And we've got feature flags, and we can use real services in production to test those theories and really be taking a more, and I suppose it is an academic approach really, to be able to test something and then report back on if it's successful. When previously we would have had to spend a lot of time planning and preparing a big change where we'd go from platform A to platform B, we're now running multiple microservices and multiple switches at any one time. So I said at the start of the presentation around our business services and what they look like, and I was keen not to forget them. So when we look at office-based technologies, we probably don't think there's much movement in that. But again, I mentioned earlier about Office 365. We're all home working now. So there is a pressure put on things like VPNs, so for networking folks, but also onto our just general office computing to allow people to do their day-to-day activity. Finance and ERP.
Never heard of. I was thinking how many people had never heard of Skype before the, a WhatsApp. I mean, I've got some regular Luddites in my family, right, and who've never touched things like WhatsApp, never touched video calling, who are, I had somebody talk to me about what new camera system I needed the other day, and this is not a person I would expect to be talking to me about technology at all.
Definitely.
And actually, there's a comment in the chat about this as well. Could you argue that the consumer has driven the changes in technology?
I think you could. Definitely, and Debbie, again, thank you for interacting. It's definitely something that the consumers do force some of those changes. So that the market, when I say the market, is actually just consumers and their buying habits. If you're doing something wrong, consumers vote with their feet. Chris has already explained. If he's not happy with the speed of a website, he's gone. And that's a really true thing, that the customers do drive those changes. It is about retailer creativity, but it also is about how the market responds. Possibly a reason why we haven't seen much virtual reality at present, because that's much harder to get into a physical environment and a home environment because adoption's quite low. Whereas augmented reality, people have got phones, people have got things around them that are much easier to implement and trial with. So I think definitely I would argue that the consumer drives those changes, but also technology availability. It's one of those things. It's a quote that's misquoted a number of times, but necessity is the mother of invention. And we sometimes just need to solve problems and we invent something cool to do it. Other times there's some cool technology. How do we shoehorn this into what we do today? Because it might be cool. So we've got a heuristic approach and an approach that just we need to do something.
And that's how technology. I can remember somebody telling me the hypodermic needle. The technology behind that was devised for boring out the center of rifles and things like that. And look at the like I say, things like Skype and Teams. We've kind of shoehorned them into other applications recently. I saw a gig. I haven't been to a gig for ages, but actually I saw one the other night that was hosted via Skype, which is really cool. And
yeah, we've had a comedy gig hosted by our team, actually, who did a comedy gig through one of the Britain's Got Talent finalists over Zoom. Wow. And that was the point where I kind of was like mind blown. Now this is, our networks team were panicking that we've got a live stream running from our head office. But that's the things that is driven from that.
Mm.
But thanks for the question, Debbie. Yeah, and finance and ERP is another area that is huge that I could bore you to tears with, but I won't do on this call. I already mentioned handheld devices, and I actually carry one at the moment at my home office desk, and we're putting these ruggedized devices in the hands of our colleagues, our home delivery drivers, and we're giving them more and more information. And those information systems are driving decision making, be in routing, so making sure that drivers arrive on time to your house for that delivery experience, or whether that's just scanning a barcode on a box to achieve a signature. There's so many things that we do with them. And then I mentioned earlier about warehousing and transport optimization. So, there are so many costs involved in that. It drives us to focus on our costs and reducing them. As Debbie put, the customer wants a cheaper product, therefore we have to drive costs down. And that means looking into automation and, optimizing our warehousing movements. It costs us money to move a forklift around a warehouse, regardless of how it's powered. So we need to then think of, those ways that we can deal with it. And then the last thing that I really feel I need to mention, just in case HR are watching, but pay and benefits. We have a whole stream of things that runs on pay and benefits. So be that just getting paid at the end of the month. I quite enjoy that. And I know that's why a lot of people go into work, unless you're volunteering. But also benefits. So online shopping habits actually change the way that companies offer their benefit structures. There are companies that will offer you discounts on other retailers. There are companies that give you other benefits using online portals that all requires technology folks to be a part of and drive change. We've got a wellbeing mobile app. We've got all sorts of other things that, build that around, what it's like to work for a company. One of the things I put on screen here, and I'm conscious of labouring that point, was around networks and infrastructure. So one of the things that has been really interesting recently around cloud computing is software-defined wide area networks. So moving away from costly network infrastructure and connecting one site to another site with very expensive solutions, and actually using consumer broadband because it's so available and so fast that we can actually drop a line into a store and have it connected to the data centers and the cloud via broadband and have a 4G backup line, for example. And this is something that now we're starting to see that, traditional network engineers are picking up and constantly learning. So if you're looking for places to go and learn new technologies, you'll find it in retail, but also it's constantly adapting to whatever the new stuff looks like. And we're not the only retailers investing in that. There's a load of them listed up there that are involved in getting better connectivity to their stores and actually changing the way that we write applications. So before, when you were a company that was looking at writing a till, for example, so I'm going to take payment, you'd have a big server to write down all your transactions. Think of it as your general ledger where you write everything down. You'd have your cash drawer that you put all your cash in, and then you'll have your big calculator, which is effectively what a till is. Actually, we scratch that because if the network goes down, well, all of that's gone offline. That's a problem. We don't think about that anymore. We're thinking about redundancy and making networking and infrastructure available so that we can access data at any time. And that's a big shift, I think, that we definitely see.
I mean, so my dad actually used to work for, I'm not sure if you remember Rosebees, who they were a curtains and linens retail store, kind of a Dunelm mill, as it was in the day, kind of competitor. Yeah. And my dad was actually the computer systems manager, and one of his jobs was going and testing till systems. And we're talking back in the day where this is pre-internet, right? Yeah. So these things were plugged in via essentially a phone line connection that was going off and sending information to a mainframe computer. So not even we're talking pre-servers, pre-cloud. We're talking big mainframe system that was spitting out printouts on dot matrix paper. But the objective there was exactly the same: optimization, supply. You don't want too much stock in a store, so you want new stock to arrive at the point that it's about to go out of stock. And I mean, it was exactly the same kind of objective. But back then you were talking about boxes and boxes of paper printouts and people kind of manually going through it with calculators. The actual computing power available was limited. It seems like it's just more and more and more and more into that objective.
Definitely. And what we see now as well is this, and we've talked about this with some of my more mature colleagues in the business, and they were saying, what goes around comes around. So your example there of your dad, it was kind of, how do I program this piece of code to make it small enough to fit on a floppy disk or whatever the transmission medium was of the day? How do I make it as small as possible? And then a couple of years later, we had this problem where, everything was a RAM hungry program. And then we've gone back to writing really small pieces of code that run in functions. So I think it is a bit of a cycle that we start to see. But also, you're right, that computing power is that if you remove that connectivity need and you can just have really light calling functions to get information when you want it, you don't need those big hungry servers anymore. And that's the change that retailers are experimenting with, and especially in the manufacturing industry and other areas, they're going to start to experiment even more so with the Internet of Things and how those sensors communicate, so that they're doing that in a way that gets the information to the right place as quick as possible.
Because I suppose when you're buying in your compute power, as you guys are, if you can shave a couple of compute cycles off a function, that can be a massive saving for the business as well. Like you were saying, your forklift trucks cost money whenever they drive somewhere. So if you can make the journey shorter, it saves money. If you can shave a bit of RAM or a little bit of computation off a function, then that has a tangible cost benefit to the business.
Definitely. And to my business colleagues and the stakeholders that I work with, they're starting to understand that even more. So we're talking to them about flashy new cloud technology, and they're actually thinking about, okay, how can I make this process quicker? So we're talking about processing times of a customer order, or we're talking about processing times of a particular instruction to a handheld computer. Well, if we can shave time off that, that's now tangible in a stakeholder's head, because it's not just about the time it takes, because that's a colleague waiting. That's a waste, one of the 8 wastes of lean. Definitely worth looking into if anyone's interested in business analysis. But if you've actually removed the weight and you're also shaving process time down, that's straight off your bottom line. That's a cost, and you've got rid of it. So definitely, it's an exciting time to be a developer in that space. I just got one more slide actually. It was just to look further afield. And if you are looking and interested in retail, and go down the rabbit hole that I did one night, the best examples I can find of creative retail is out in the Far East. So in China, you've got a company called Alibaba. You might have heard of them. Their Hema store, and I apologize if I've pronounced that wrong, is full of innovation. Compare it to Amazon Go, but it has so many different things that mean that customers are actually willing to move house to be near to their local store. They have pick and deliver from stores. They have all sorts of offerings in terms of local collection, and they even offer a mobile app for local grocery stores. So it really does show you where the future of retail could end up being. And if you do get a chance, have a look on YouTube at some of their videos. The last one is a 24-hour store that I found that actually drives to you. So this particular store we looked at in a Store of the Future concept as part of the graduate scheme, and retail stores that are actually driving around and self-driving to find the consumers that they need. So think of that as being a food truck that puts itself in the middle of Canary Wharf in London at lunchtime. Genius.
I don't mean to do this to you, Luke, but surely
well,
that's
what we
had with milk. I'm sure. No, I'm about to say, surely that's what we had with milk floats. Like 20 years ago, right? I mean, it was a shop. It was a milk shop that essentially drove to your house.
What goes around comes around, and that's the thing, is that we see things come back in a different way. And this one's particularly interesting. The reason why I say look at China is because you see what's being come up with and a rapid pace of change, and with a huge amount of investment, what you can achieve. But then you look at the UK, and what actually appears in our stores and in front of us is very different. So I think that kind of leads me nicely on to the summary, really, of kind of saying that, retail is not just about your groceries, getting the latest clothing trend, your Amazon Prime delivery. Technologies around us are moving really fast, especially in retail. And COVID-19 and other external factors have shown us how it's just important for retailers to adapt and then create technologies that support that. And as we've seen, those examples in the Far East, some of them will make their way into commonplace and others will be trialed and disappear. But the future keeps developing as retailers react to that consumer behavior, as Debbie called out earlier. And new technologies will continue servicing those changing needs of consumers. While I suppose the challenge for us now is to keep focusing on reducing our costs and keep delivering those reasons for customers to shop. And that kind of rounds off what I kind of want to show here. And I hope that everybody watching has seen a little bit of a deep dive really into the breadth that retail goes into, and definitely what gets me out of bed in the morning and excites me to go back to work in the retail sector within technology.
I mean,
I suppose the last thing... Go on, Chris, go for it.
Do you remember the old bookmobiles? The kind of mobile libraries that would come round and sell, sold bookstore to door. I mean, I kind of wonder whether that is an early model for Amazon, right?
It's definitely a start, and this is one thing that self-driving cars have had known troubles with UK roads for a while. But as that technology starts to get better, there is no doubt that we're going to start to see some of that. The parcel couriers at the moment through COVID-19 have been looking at ways that they can improve their sustainability. Electric cars and electric trucks are coming into commonplace. It's a matter of time before somebody finds a use case that means automation actually becomes the next thing. We're really fortunate. We're at home a lot of the time at the moment, so we can receive parcels quite readily. But actually, that's definitely something that retailers are looking into for the future. So that rounds off my talk. I'd like to say thank you to Chris for the invite and the University of Lincoln for letting me come and virtually join. It's been an absolute pleasure to talk to everybody, and thank you for the questions and interactions and comments. If anybody's interested, we've got the Twitter handle of UOL CompSci, so definitely get back in touch and people will be involved there. There's plenty more talks this week. I've noticed that a lot of the speakers are a lot more qualified than myself, so I will be tuning into a fair few of them. And then if anybody is interested and got any further questions, I've put my LinkedIn on there, Luke C. Thompson, if anybody wants to get in touch. Chris, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you. Any closing words from yourself?
Yeah, just thank you ever so much for coming back. It's I have had a comment from one of your old lecturers, Derek, said it's very nice to see you back on. Well, we'd normally say home soil, right? But it's the home interweb.
Hopefully, I can come back at some point. But yes, nice to hear from Derek too.
Brilliant. Well, thank you for that, Luke. And like I say, hope everyone gets a chance to watch some of the other sessions. Cheers.
Thank you.